He was a failed priest who became a godlike deity to some and a literal monster to millions. Behind the Iron Curtain, one man's signature could erase entire families, villages, and histories from the face of the earth. He turned a peasant society into a nuclear superpower, but the foundation of his empire was built on the bodies of the innocent. This is the story of Joseph Stalin, a man who mastered the art of silence, fear, and absolute control. Welcome to Profile, where we unmask the figures who shaped and sometimes shook our world. If you seek the stories others miss, join our community by hitting that subscribe button. Joseph Stalin was born in 1878 in the small town of Gori, Georgia, into an extremely poor family. He had no brothers or sisters and grew up in absolute poverty. His father was a simple shoemaker and a violent alcoholic who beat his only son mercilessly. His mother was a simple woman who washed clothes in people's homes to survive. As a teenager, Joseph won a scholarship to study at a religious school in Tiflis at a Georgian Orthodox church. He learned the Russian language at the church school, but throughout his entire life, he spoke it with an incredibly thick, heavy accent. While studying theology in Tiflis to become a priest, he secretly began reading the works of Karl Marx and other left-wing revolutionary thinkers. In 1900, while he was just a young man, he participated in revolutionary political activities, including workers' demonstrations and strikes. He then joined the military wing of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, the main revolutionary party in Tsarist Russia, where Plekhanov and Lenin were prominent figures. When the party split in 1905 into the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks, he took the side of the Bolsheviks, who were more radical and led by Lenin. In the period following the 1905 revolution, Stalin was the leader of gangs that robbed banks to fund the Bolshevik Party. It was these practical, gritty actions that made him a figure of importance within the party, and in January 1912, he was elected to the Central Committee. For the next decade, he worked with underground political organizations in the Caucasus, and between 1902 and the 1917 Russian Revolution, he was arrested and exiled to Siberia numerous times. Stalin's first major success came in 1912 when Lenin, who was in exile in Switzerland, appointed him to the Bolshevik Party's Central Committee. The following year, Stalin published an article on the role of Marxism in Russia's destiny. He also changed his name from Jugashvili to Stalin, a Russian word meaning the man of steel. In 1917, Stalin escaped his exile in Siberia and joined Lenin and his coup against the government, which ultimately led to the total overthrow of the czars. Unlike other Bolshevik leaders, Stalin was not highly educated, nor was he a man of theory. However, he was a man of action, organization, and execution. Among Lenin's associates, the founders of the Soviet government, Stalin ranked behind Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Bukharin in importance and closeness to the leader. Until 1922, when he was elected General Secretary of the Communist Party as a result of their rivalries, no one ever imagined he would one day push them all aside and rise to the position of undisputed leader of the Soviet Union. From 1917 to 1922, Stalin played a marginal role alongside Vladimir Lenin until Lenin fell ill and withdrew from the political scene. In late 1922, in order to seize absolute leadership of the country, Stalin moved Lenin to a small town 50 kilometers from Moscow under the guise of rest and medical treatment. In reality, it was to isolate him and keep him away from others, gradually cutting off his connection to the outside world. Lenin, who had suffered a stroke in 1922, became completely incapacitated by another stroke in 1923. From 1924 until his death, he could no longer participate in Communist Party gatherings. During these few years, Stalin was busy consolidating power. He rapidly climbed the party ladder, rising from Commissar of Nationalities to General Secretary of the Central Committee. Stalin had a cunning method for fighting his rivals and political opponents. Before any other state or party organization, he seized control of the Soviet security police, the Cheka, and won over its chief, Dzerzhinsky. With the help of the Cheka, Stalin learned the private secrets and weaknesses of high-ranking party and state officials, using these vulnerabilities to force them into obedience or to discard them when necessary. He also created a personal spy network within the Kremlin and personally monitored the telephone conversations of prominent officials. The head of the Secretariat of the Soviet Communist Party's Politburo during the early years of Stalin's rule wrote in his memoirs that he personally witnessed Stalin eavesdropping on internal Kremlin phone calls. He explained that a Czech communist engineer, while installing the internal Kremlin telephone system, had installed this listening device in Stalin's office. After the installation and testing, to ensure he would never reveal the secret, the engineer was arrested and executed by Cheka agents. Stalin's growing power terrified the dying Lenin, who, in a note to Communist Party leaders, called for the removal of the rude and unpolite Stalin from the position of General Secretary. The validity of this document was put to a vote at the party Congress, and Stalin's agents in the Congress unanimously voted against its validity. This note remained hidden for 30 years after Stalin's death, and 60 years after it was written. Lenin died in 1924. In the battle for leadership, loyalty to Lenin was a preordained requirement. Stalin organized Lenin's funeral and, in his speech, praised Lenin in almost religious terms, declaring his undying loyalty. Trotsky was ill at the time, and it is said that Stalin lied to him about the funeral date so he couldn't attend. Ultimately, Trotsky, the man closest to Lenin, lost the struggle to Stalin. As expected, Stalin succeeded in pushing aside his main internal rival and enemy, seizing the leadership of the Soviet Union. Before this, Stalin had taken control of affairs as General Secretary with the cooperation of two other influential leaders, Zinoviev and Kamenev. Stalin desperately needed their support and had shared the powers and privileges of leadership with them. But during the 14th Party Congress in December 1925, having consolidated his power and seeing no further need for his old allies, Stalin parted ways with them and refused to consult them further on important state and party matters. One of Stalin's common methods throughout his reign was creating rivalry and discord among various state, party, and military officials. This allowed him to force each group to spy on the other. In the early stages of his struggle for power, he exploited the enmity between Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Trotsky, using the first two to remove Trotsky from the scene. After Trotsky, it was Zinoviev and Kamenev's turn. This time, Stalin sought help from Bukharin, who held a distinguished position among the old party leaders. Once the main rivals were gone, Bukharin himself was criticized for right-wing deviation and bourgeois theories, and was expelled from the Politburo and the Central Committee. Stalin showed no mercy or consideration toward his rivals. When fighting those he perceived as threats to his power, he gave no thought to their past services or his personal relationships with them. Bazhanov, the head of the Secretariat of the Soviet Politburo, wrote that no one was as instrumental in Stalin's rise to power as Zinoviev. Yet, when Stalin decided to remove him, and later ordered his execution, he completely forgot the past. Bazhanov, who witnessed a conversation between them, wrote that when Zinoviev reminded Stalin of his past help and asked, "Does Comrade Stalin know the meaning of loyalty and gratitude?" Stalin replied with a biting tone, "Yes, I know it well. It is a disease that dogs usually suffer from." With Lenin's death, Stalin intensified the policy of intimidation and repression to consolidate his power. He ruled by creating terror among the people. His government was strictly totalitarian, and anyone who opposed him was eliminated. He first increased the power of the secret police and encouraged people to spy on each other. Soon, all those who had held leadership roles in the October 1917 revolution were arrested. The charges were always the same: contact with capitalist powers and conspiring with Trotsky. No specific evidence was ever provided. Instead, through mental and physical torture, the accused confessed to crimes they never committed. From 1924 to 1938, Stalin executed and killed most of his communist comrades, fellow party members, and former brothers in arms. Then came the Great Purge from 1936 to 1938. In these two horrific years, about 1.5 million people were arrested and 750,000 were executed. In total, 4 trials were held between August 1936 and March 1938. 3 public show trials and 1 secret military tribunal. 66 people, all high-ranking political and military figures, the founders of the revolution and the architects of the Soviet Union, were tried. 50 were sentenced to death and 16 to imprisonment in Siberia. All the men who had established this fearsome system were executed. Only Trotsky remained, in exile in Mexico, and he too was soon murdered by a secret agent of Stalin. Of the 6 men Lenin had named in his testament, only one remained: Stalin. In history, it is famously said that in killing communists, no one, not even Hitler, could ever match Stalin. Stalin had an inferiority complex from childhood, which, combined with his ambition and vanity, turned into jealousy and malice. Having received no serious education and knowing no foreign languages, in 1917 he became a member of a government that even its enemies considered the most cultured in Europe. Surrounded by brilliant figures, he felt his inferiority as a political leader, a theorist, and an orator. His jealousy toward the true intellectuals of the party sparked from here. He didn't just want limitless power, he wanted glory. In the eyes of history, no one was allowed to be higher than him. Brzezinski, in his book, examined the nature of Stalin's Great Purge trials. He wrote that during the interrogation of the accused, many of whom played a larger role in the Bolshevik Revolution than Stalin himself, they were told that if they confessed and begged for mercy, their punishment would be reduced. Many surrendered quickly, confessing to both real and imagined crimes. Those who resisted were forced to surrender under physical and psychological torture. These confessions were extracted on Stalin's personal orders, because he didn't believe destroying their bodies was enough. He wanted to break their personalities and bury all their past glories along with their corpses before sending them to the firing squad. In 1932, a great tragedy occurred in Stalin's private life. This was the death or suicide of Nadezhda Alliluyeva, Stalin's 32-year-old wife. It happened following a verbal argument at a party celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. Books written about Stalin's private life mention that he was a womanizer, sometimes flirting with other women in front of his wife. Nadezhda, a sensitive and educated woman, suffered from this. In her final years, she enrolled at Moscow University to distance herself from this painful environment. But her familiarity with the realities of life for the Soviet people only increased her hatred of Stalin. Following one of their heated arguments over politics, she was found dead in her apartment with a revolver in her hand. She had 2 children with Stalin, a son named Vasily and a daughter named Svetlana. Svetlana defected to the U.S. Embassy in Delhi in 1967, at the height of the Cold War. Stalin had also been married once before in his youth His first wife, Ekaterina, died in 1907, only a year after their marriage. They had a son named Yakov, who later had a poor relationship with Stalin. It is said that Stalin's strictness toward his son was so extreme that Yakov attempted suicide by shooting himself, but survived. Stalin's only comment was, "He didn't even have the sense to shoot straight and die like a man." Yakov later served in the Red Army and was captured by the Germans. The Germans offered to exchange him for a German general, but Stalin refused. Some say he replied, "I will never trade a lieutenant for a general." While others claim he said, "I have no son." Yakov was killed in a German camp. Some say he died while trying to escape into the electric fence, while others believe he committed suicide. Alongside the consolidation of his dictatorship, a massive cult of personality began to emerge. Soviet cities were renamed in his honor, and history was rewritten to portray him as a legendary figure of the 1917 revolution. His name permeated every aspect of life, from art and music to the national anthem. Under Stalin, traditional social institutions were intentionally undermined. Loyalty to the family and the church was replaced by absolute loyalty to the state. Furthermore, religious practices were banned as they were viewed as counter-revolutionary. Churches were closed or demolished, and state-sponsored atheism became the official ideology. As the 1920s drew to a close, Stalin set his sights on a radical transformation of the nation. He launched a series of 5-year plans designed to drag the Soviet Union from a peasant agricultural society into an industrial superpower. His development programs were built on a total state-owned economy and included the collectivization of the country's agriculture, a policy where the government seized control of every single farm. Millions of farmers who refused to participate in Stalin's collectivization scheme were either executed or exiled to distant regions. Under Stalin's iron leadership, by the end of the 1930s, the Soviet Union was indeed transformed from a predominantly peasant country into one of the world's leading industrial powers. However, this policy led to catastrophic, widespread famines across Soviet territories. The confiscation of grain by Soviet officials was a direct cause of the Great Famine between 1932 and 1934, particularly in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and the North Caucasus. The artificial famine created by Stalin in Ukraine alone resulted in the deaths of between 4 and 10 million Ukrainians. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, Stalin and Hitler signed a non-aggression pact, agreeing that neither would invade the other's territory. Following this agreement, Stalin annexed Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, as well as parts of Poland and Romania, into the Soviet Union. He also launched an invasion of Finland. But in June 1941, Hitler tore up the peace treaty and launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Despite urgent warnings from the United States and British governments, and even from his own intelligence officers about the imminent German attack, Stalin ignored these reports. As a result, in the beginning of the invasion, Soviet military forces were completely unprepared to face the well-equipped German machinery. As German forces closed in on Moscow, the capital, Stalin chose to stay in the city and issued the order for a scorched earth defensive policy. Under this order, Soviet forces were required to destroy all resources, food supplies, and infrastructure that could be useful to the enemy before retreating from any area. Finally, during the Battle of Stalingrad, the tide turned. This battle, which lasted from August 1942 to February 1943, ended with a decisive victory for the Red Army. The German army, suffering massive casualties, was forced to retreat from the frozen Soviet lands. This deadly struggle against German fascism swallowed the lives of 27 million Soviet citizens. After the German surrender in 1945, Stalin continued to occupy and dominate most of Eastern Europe, establishing the Soviet Union as one of the world's two superpowers. This position remained unchallenged for nearly 4 decades after his death in 1953. Age did not soften the man of steel. The post-war era in the Soviet Union was marked, just like the years before the war, by arrests, torture, terror, purges, executions, and exile to the forced labor camps in the frozen wastes of Siberia, known as the gulags. During this period, even the smallest sign of opposition was brutally crushed, and anything that carried a Western influence was strangled in its infancy. He installed communist governments across all of Eastern Europe, and with the successful test of an atomic bomb in 1949, he launched the Soviet nuclear age. In 1950, he gave permission to Kim Il-sung, the communist leader of North Korea, to invade South Korea, which was supported by the United States, leading to the bloody Korean War. In his final years, Stalin fell into a deep state of paranoia and grew suspicious of everything and everyone. Finally, on March 5, 1953, at the age of 74, he died of a stroke. His body was embalmed and kept in the Lenin Mausoleum in Moscow's Red Square until 1961. In that year, as part of the de-Stalinization policies, his body was removed on the orders of his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, and buried near the Kremlin wall. After Stalin's death and the election of Khrushchev, a period of limited freedom arrived, and the statues and other manifestations of his cult of personality were dismantled. Yet, despite his violent and repressive rule, opinion polls over the last 2 decades show that more than half of Russians still love and admire him. What do you think is the reason for Stalin's popularity in Russia today? In your view, what factors have allowed the most fearsome dictator of 20th century Russia to remain so beloved in that country? Every story has 2 sides, and the truth usually lies somewhere in the shadows. We want to hear your perspective. Join the discussion in the comments below. If this profile gave you a new perspective, support our mission with a like and share. Thank you for being part of the Profile community. Until next time, stay curious.